About 150 years ago, a prominent physician named John Snow removed the handle from the Broad Street pump. And this was all in an effort to reduce the spread of deadly cholera. He had successfully linked this disease with contamination from sewage. So he removed the handle. This account was wonderfully written in a book called The Ghost Map last year by Stephen Johnson. And the story was more than just the history. It included an account of how there was about 100,000 people that made a living out of the sewers. And these guys were called bone pickers, rag gatherers, pure finders, dredgermen, mudlarks, sewer hunters, dustmen, night soil men, bunters, toshers, and shoremen. Well, here in the 21st century, wastewater treatment plants and their operators with modern plumbing are much more sophisticated scavengers. You know, without question, I believe sewage treatment can be categorized as the best advantage to improving public health in our lifetime, certainly over the last couple centuries. But the whole concept of wastewater treatment has evolved. You know, originally they were called sanitation plants, and then they became known as sewage treatment plants. With the Clean Water Act, they became known as the water pollution control facilities. And now we have reclamation plants where you actually reuse the water for irrigation of golf courses and things like that. So the point is that wastewater treatment has evolved not just to promote public health, but also to improve the environment. So I have a question for you. What should you do with a banana peel? You know, you could send it to the landfill through your garbage, you could compost it, or you could send it through your disposer to a treatment plant. Well, we think that it's not only acceptable to send it to the treatment plant, it's the responsible thing to do. Food waste disposers are simply a device by which you convert food scraps to a liquid resource. And that liquid resource would be biosolids and methane capture at treatment plants. So just how much food waste do we create here in the U.S.? About 30 million tons annually. Now, there's significant costs for disposal. Transportation is an issue. You've got landfill tipping fees. And with recent attention on greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, it's forcing communities to take a look at long-term solutions for food waste. We do think that food waste disposers are not only acceptable, they're responsible. Here's a graph that shows the increasing population here in the U.S. and the amount of food waste that's increasing as well. Since we have to handle our food waste, it makes sense to look at things from a holistic point of view, from a sustainable point of view, where you're not only looking at the economics, but also the environmental and the social impacts. Quite simply, if we can do more than just reduce and reuse and recycle, you have to look at recycling the food waste to utilize the energy, to reuse the nutrients, minimize public health effects, reduce fossil fuel consumption, and lower greenhouse gas emissions. So let's talk about the 4 different methods of handling your food waste. Incineration, or waste to energy, is one option. Landfilling is very popular. Composting is another option. And then sending the food waste to a treatment plant would be the 4th option. Incineration is growing in popularity, especially in large municipalities. Here in the U.S., about 13% of all municipal solid waste is disposed of through incineration. Now, it works best with dry waste, and since food waste is 70% water, it's not necessarily the best method. It's just simply not very efficient. Waste to energy options are also very expensive, mainly due to permitting requirements, air pollution concerns. They have to be very sophisticated with the way that they remove the air pollutants, such as dioxins, furans, sulfur dioxides, and nitrogen oxides. Probably the most popular method of handling your food waste would be landfilling. Now, there's a municipal trend to divert organics away from landfills, and this is to extend their lifespan and to reduce the overall cost associated with hauling and tipping fees. In the European Union, there's a landfill directive where they're hoping to reduce their municipal solid waste landfilling by 75 or up to 75% of their 1995 levels by the year 2010. That's a pretty ambitious goal, but this is all in an effort to control greenhouse gas emissions from landfills. Food waste disposers are becoming an option that the European Union is looking at to try and help that diversion. I said earlier that food waste is 70% water, so leachate is a potential problem with groundwater contamination. I mentioned methane generation from landfills is a concern, and that's why the European Union is looking to utilize disposers more, especially in countries that are actually prohibiting the use now. Landfills are doing a much better job of capturing methane, but food waste degrades fairly quickly. And since it takes days or even weeks before food waste reaches a landfill, most of the energy potential is lost by the time it reaches a landfill. And decomposition takes very slow in landfills with regard to cellulosic materials. That's where most of the methane is actually generated. So methane capture at landfills of food waste is simply just not very efficient. The third option that's gaining a lot of popularity is composting, especially on the West Coast. Source-separated composting is very popular. It's considered very environmentally friendly, very green. It's ideal for bulky organic materials, but producing a good quality compost with a high value requires a degree of control of the ingredients, the moisture, and the process. It may be practical for residential homeowners, but it's not necessarily practical, especially for inner cities or multifamily dwellings. In fact, in the bigger cities, you can't do it. It does also require quite a bit of diligence to do it properly. Collection costs for source-separated organics and composting is very significant, and it has to be done separately from your other waste streams, your recyclables and your other garbage. Composting requires a large amount of space for processing, and there's certain materials like your proteins that just aren't appropriate for composting. They attract vermin, they have odors, so certainly composting isn't right for everything. Fruits and vegetables, sure. And although it's gaining popularity, there's stormwater issues to resolve, and there are emissions as well. If it's not done properly, you still produce methane, and as well as ammonia. CO2 as well. The last method I want to talk about is wastewater treatment. And food waste disposers obviously use the wastewater treatment scheme, and they simply are utilizing the existing conveyance system, the sewers, for transporting the organics. This is the most convenient and hygienic method because it eliminates the waste immediately as soon as it goes down the disposer. I said earlier food waste is 70% water, so where else would be a better place to send the organics than to the treatment plant? Also, food waste has a similar specific gravity as human waste. So after you grind it, since 95% of these particles are smaller than 3 millimeters, adequate sewer velocities of 2 foot per second keep these items in suspension, and they travel down the sewer within hours to the treatment plant. At the treatment plant, you can convert these organics to biosolids and beneficially reuse them as soil conditioners and fertilizers. In the U.S., about 60% of all biosolids are beneficially reused. And probably the most emerging use for solids processed at a treatment plant is the capture of methane. About 54% of all wastewater flows in the U.S. are processed using anaerobic digestion, and that methane captured can be used for either thermal or electrical energy. There is about 16,000 treatment plants in the U.S., a very small percentage that have anaerobic digestion, but as I said, over 54% of the flows, your larger communities are actually utilizing anaerobic digestion.